We are one of the poorest countries in the world. Our state can be compared to a medieval feudal state. Our king Abdulaziz is in a constant power struggle with the plenty of tribes in our nation and the ulema, Islamic scholars opposing modernization. It is our utmost importance that we keep them loyal to our side. The only upside with our country is that we might sit on a huge oil deposit. But right now, the small amount that we have found has been leased to the Americans in return for a large part of our budget. The long road towards modernization can begin. We will convene the Council of Saudi Arabia to discuss our issues. The king decided to invite several urban intellectuals and modernists to the council despite the annoyance by the tribes and the ulema. This will allow us to use their knowledge to reform our financial system in the future. But before we are able to do that, we have to improve our industry. So to work we go. As most of our country's deserts, it is difficult to reliably supply our population with water. We must expand the network of wells to slowly improve our horrible infrastructure. Using the pilgrimage tax, we had enough money to start several other projects, such as developing post and telecommunications and setting up charitable ambulance organizations. As of now, we have only improved our current industry, not grown it. So we will promote craft workshops. In the east of our country there are two states which are semi-independent. While removing their autonomy would help in our future plans to centralize our state, we can gain a lot from supporting them too, and it won't anger the tribes. This means we can also invest in the eastern provinces, granting us 2 civilian factories. While we now have 5 civilian factories, we only need 1 more to begin to reform our financial systems. Our hopes on oil haven't come to a reality yet. Most of our wells are pumping up nothing, while the rest are pumping up more water than oil. We can only hope that we find better oil fields. While we wait for the 6th civilian factory to build, we will continue to move away from our feudal tribal system. Since our education is completely lacking, we will send our students abroad despite the drop of loyalty from the ulema. We can now begin to centralize our state. We will strengthen the authority of Abdulaziz and expand the power of the state, modernizing it at the same time, sadly at the cost of tribal and ulema loyalty. Then an interesting opportunity arrived from Oman. The Imamate of Oman has begun an armed conflict against the British puppet of the Al Said dynasty. We will support the Imamate to hopefully reduce British influence in the region. With our state centralized, we can begin to modernize the roots of our country. This means abolishing slavery, which has negatively impacted our international standing, and also launch a vigorous campaign to unite our judiciary and destroy the independent tribal laws. To heal the tribal loyalty down to 40%, we will construct the Muraba Palace. Electricity, drainage and the first concrete road will be built in a traditional Arabic style to house the king and his court. The area will also include prince schools to educate the many children of the Al Suad family. Then we received the great news that the 6th civilian factory was done and that the modernists in the Assembly of Saudi Arabia were ready to reform our financial system. We will untie our currency from the British pound and create our own monetary agency. This will bring us closer and closer to get rid of our poorly developed state. There is one problem we haven't tried to fix yet. After we conquered the kingdom of Hijaz, we managed to unite it with Najd. But the cultural gap is still massive. We must fix this. Luckily, the local nobility wasn't removed after our victory, and despite tribal anger, we will support them so they can help us modernize Najd faster. Then, before we had dealt with the issues, it happened. Oil. We have found oil, and plenty of it. The growing oil concessions from the Americans will allow us to boost us into a modern state. We are no longer a feudal tribal state, we are a growing trade empire. The financial future of our country is secured. But with this newfound wealth, neighboring countries might turn towards us and try to subjugate us. While the Iraqi Golden Square are having trouble against the Kurdistani rebellion, they could still pose a threat to us in the future. And while we have a truce with Yemen, Oman is still in a civil war. The biggest threat, though, is the British. They are hungry for our oil. We have only 2 divisions, but we could declare jihad and mobilize the White Army for another 4. Still, this is not enough, and with only 2 military factories it will be difficult to grow our army. We will begin to produce improvised firearms and create ammunition manufacturers with our newfound oil money. All this will culminate in Abdulaziz establishing the General Authority for Military Industries so that we can reduce our dependency on foreign arms. But while we might have enough guns, we still don't have a regular army. Our whole military is just irregular divisions. We must slowly move away from this, or else we will be stuck in our tribal practices. We will create a Taif military school and establish the general staff, including Said Kurdi, an artillery expert, and Mohammed Ashuhail, an infantry specialist. With their help, we will form the first Saudi regular army. Now we have the difficult choice to fully move away from our irregular forces or to create a mixed army. While having a mixed army would make it larger, we must still move away from the irregulars. All modern nations have done that and we must follow them not to fall behind. This means we can start to edit division templates and train as much divisions as we want. So it is time to declare what we will use our army for. We will establish our anti-colonial policy with the goal of uniting Arabia. But the British are way too strong right now. We must wait until we have built up our army and industry strong enough to deal with them. We will start by training 11 new divisions, boosting our army to more than 100,000 personnel. Then we will continue to build our civilian and military industry. For example, creating a department for the Arab industry development and supporting our farmers, planting date palm gardens and also procuring more food that our farmers can't plant. To kickstart our backwards education and scientific community, we will open our first university, the Riyadh University. We have now trained 24 divisions, but to continue training at the same rate, we will need more equipment and more manpower. So we will continue to develop our military industry and jump up to service by requirement. But we will also start to mobilize the tribes which lost their jobs once we stopped using irregulars. We should be ready for a war with our first nation now, Yemen. But as we moved our troops to the region, we noticed a huge problem: supply. Our infrastructure is still bad in most areas and we don't even have railways to our supply hubs. We will immediately start to restore the Hejaz railway but also begin to modernize our infrastructure. With the railway built and our divisions along Yemen reduced, we are no longer taking attrition. This means we can punish the Kingdom of Yemen and use their resources for the great war against colonialism. But they are in a faction with the Iranian kingdom. Luckily, we don't have a border with them and their military is having organization problems, so sending them to Yemen would be almost impossible. As we declared war, they started mobilizing their irregular militias, so we have to hurry up before they get deployed. We managed to capture their 4 most northern provinces before we met their army in Sanaa. They had prepared for our arrival and trying to capture the mountain city will be difficult. Instead, we continued south and managed to encircle one of their cavalry divisions. As we began to attack their capital to capture the supply hub, it went slow. Soon they noticed they could counterattack us and pushed us back from one tile, but they pushed us back with the troops defending Sanaa, and without any troops in the city we could capture it. We immediately started building a railway to the city and soon supply was kinda back. The encircled cavalry division can now be destroyed and the rest of Yemen will be occupied. It didn't take long before we had captured their horses and we could return to the south of Sanaa. We managed to take back the province and then turn to the coast and capture Al-Hudaydah, but then we got stopped outside their last city. So we decided to send extra divisions to the front since we had the supply. After a week or so they had arrived and we started to push all their divisions to the city so we could deal with them there. This was not so smart since they now had 4 divisions defending it. As the battle began we could only slowly crawl forward and we lost every other battle. Still, slowly but surely we disorganized their divisions and managed to destroy half of them. Just as we thought we were starting to close in on the city center, several tribal leaders arrived to help them out and they were 4 divisions once again. So we repeated our strategy and soon enough we entered the city center and they surrendered. But at the cost of a whole ton of our men. We must learn from our mistakes before we strike against the British. Still, with Yemen down, Iran drew out of the war and accepted our occupation. During our war with Yemen, our troops were more unorganized than we wished. Unfortunate infighting even took place. To fix this and bring our army more united, we will standardize our military uniforms. We will also reform our officers and train them in modern warfare to stop them from making stupid decisions in the battlefield. And lastly, we will simply continue to modernize our army. In the meantime, we will prepare for our next war. We will renew our feud with the Hashemites. They somehow managed to annex Kuwait from the British and have begun with their own form of pan-Arabism. While their goals may be aligned with ours, their views on how to reach it are different. We must destroy them before they destroy us. So, to get supply in the area, we have started building 2 supply hubs along their border, but also started producing trucks which will replace the slow camels. We are now ready to attack the Iraqis, but before we did, we received the great news that the economic and cultural differences between Hejaz and Najd weren't noticeable anymore. A long time of building factories and modernizing both states has flattened out our economic discrepancy. Alright, time for Iraq. They have almost no divisions on our border, but they could be as strong as we are. Still, we declared war and began our goal to liberate our core territory. With the biggest invasion force the Arabic world had seen in a while, we managed to encircle and capture Kuwait City early in the war. From there, we continued north and cut off their only access to the Arabic Gulf. But we didn't stop there. For some reason, their strong army never fully showed up and we could continue to the north. The more and more cities we captured, the more of their own population joined the fight against them. Soon we had even captured one of their biggest cities, Baghdad. Since we had marched all the way up to Baghdad, we were extremely close to encircle some of their divisions along the Iranian border. They tried to take back Baghdad and save the threatened divisions, but we managed to keep the city and also encircle them. It didn't take long to clean them up and we could turn back north to end the Iraqi government. In the western deserts, they had almost no supply while we received a ton from our newly built supply hub, so we started our attacks there. But as we arrived to the tiles along the Syrian border, we finally found their army. And as quick as we arrived, they began using it to push us back again. So instead of trying to defeat them there, we turned back to Baghdad and took a quicker way towards their second big city, Mosul. As we arrived to the outskirts and tried to enter it, we still met a lot of resistance and had to call a pause. In the meantime, we continued along the Iranian border and after a longer fight than we expected, we managed to capture Sulaimania. We had also started creeping up from the south to slowly improve our situation in Mosul. As we began to threaten to encircle the city, they surrendered before we had the chance to complete the encirclement. Iraq has been integrated and we can recruit their soldiers in our army now for the last battle against the British. Iraq is also home to a ton of oil that we ourselves have control over and not the Americans. We will begin to develop their infrastructure to boost our oil output so that we can export even more. With all the new manpower and a ton of equipment, we will upgrade our division templates before the war. We also trained 8 cavalry divisions which will serve as support garrisons against any British naval invasions. We have supply all across our 3 fronts, but before we start the war, we will begin to core Yemen. Our pan-Arab propaganda has helped us put out any resistance. We can now begin to try and liberate the British Arabian colonies. Our diplomats tried to peacefully get them to surrender Qatar just like Iran had done with Kuwait, but as expected the negotiations were fruitless. So we started a border conflict to liberate the state. The British are currently fighting against the Germans and Japanese, so they aren't so keen on a second conflict in the Middle East. Still, they defended Qatar and brought in divisions from neighboring states. Surprisingly, we were stronger than the Brits and managed to kick them out of Qatar. We quickly established a puppet regime to justify our invasion. With Qatar liberated, we have cut off Bahrain from the rest of British Arabia. This will be the next state we try to liberate. Once again, our negotiations failed and we had to try and cross to the island. This time, the British fought more as we expected and it took a long time to begin to destroy their divisions and cross to the other side. Next up, southern Yemen. As we for the 3rd time sent a diplomat to discuss the issues with the British, they had had enough. As we began the next border conflict, they declared war on us and the final conflict began. We have divisions on all our borders with them, except with the Republic of Kurdistan. Luckily, we had a reserve force which will do fine in holding them back. We will immediately attack southern Yemen before they can bring too many reinforcements. Their biggest concentration of troops were close to Aden, even some of their allies had troops here. So instead we began our offensive more in the northeast, where they only had 1 division per tile. Naturally we broke through and had soon arrived to the Yemeni coast. This meant Aden was divided from the rest of Yemen and Oman. Before we turned towards the city, we first liberated Mukalla, an important port city, and Seyun. Turning back towards Aden, it seemed that they only had old light tanks defending the city from the eastern attacks. We could easily pierce them, but once we arrived in Aden, the full coalition of the allies were there. They pushed us back and we instead took the tile to the north of the city. We had failed to enter it and had to take a pause. But time isn't on our side, so while we wait, we continued in eastern Yemen. They still hadn't managed to bring reinforcements, and with the few divisions defending the area, we managed to encircle 3/4 of them all. For some reason, the South African garrisons didn't put up a fight and we could simply march into Kishin. Back to Aden, our troops were reorganized and we started to close the encirclement of the city. First, we captured the tile in the east and then turned to the tile in the north. Instead of retreating to Aden, the British divisions saved their skin and retreated into French Somaliland. This only made it easier to capture the city. While we lost the battle at first, we slowly but surely destroyed their organization, and once 1 division fell, the rest followed. Yemen has been liberated, only Abu Dhabi and Oman is left now. They have about 10 divisions per tile in Abu Dhabi, but because of this they have massive supply issues. With almost no organization, we managed to break through quite easily and continue to push towards Abu Dhabi. Since we didn't take a rest, they couldn't either, and their organization stayed low, allowing us to continue pushing along the Arabian Gulf. Once we arrived to the vicinity of Abu Dhabi, they managed to stop our advance, both in the city and in the south of the state. But after we threatened to encircle it, half of their forces left and we managed to enter without any problems. Most of the allied troops were in the most western part, meaning we had a chance to encircle them all. They noticed this and began to evacuate most of their divisions to the tile we needed to encircle them. So, to succeed in capturing it, we had to shrink our encirclement and bring divisions from neighboring tiles. In the end, we succeeded, but only 3 divisions had been encircled and the rest had retreated to Oman, more specifically to the Oman coast. They had none more inland, so we simply captured Ibri and Nizwa. Sadly, none of the cities were supply hubs, so we won't be able to continue without risking starving our troops. Now to the Horde. Before we attacked them, we first captured the rest of Abu Dhabi state and Musandam. As we started our attacks against Sohar, we failed miserably. We were never even close to enter the city. We won't win in this theater. We will have to begin to fight outside of the Arabian peninsula to either force them to relocate divisions or to later strike a deal with the British to give back territory in return for Oman. And the only real new area we can spread the fight to is Jordan and Palestine. For some reason they haven't a lot of divisions here. Hopefully we will reach all the way to the Suez and cripple their supply. They had managed to break through, taking back all of Oman and continuing into our own country. Luckily, we managed to push them back again. As we prepared our message of peace to the British, their diplomats arrived first. Panically, they pled for immediate peace. The Swedish reformed Vikings had landed in East England and already captured London. But instead of accepting their peace, we sent an attaché to the Swedish government and put our full support behind their invasion. If they could capture all of the British Isles, the British Empire would collapse. We watched as the Swedes with nervously little divisions captured town after town. Once the British were close to recapture London, but a lone Swedish division stopped them. Soon they had captured all of England and continued into Scotland and Wales. Only after they closed in on Edinburgh and captured Plymouth they surrendered. The war has been won, and massively. Our influence goes from Kurdistan all the way south through Palestine, Egypt, Zanzibar and South Africa. We also puppeted Pakistan, India, Burma and Malaya. Yemen and Oman are liberated. Our puppets in Qatar and Bahrain are now useless. More than 90% of both nations voted to join us, and we have finally united Arabia. We will immediately start to demobilize our economy, rebuild our nation and prospect for new oil. Finally, we will continue to export all our oil. The massive Holy Union needs all oil they can get to defeat the Soviets. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video.